Apollo saw his faded red frisbee resting near his feet, our Pluto platter. One side had the names of the planets, the other side had his grandma's name, written when she was a little girl. He hugged the disk inside. His sigh became a hum, and the hum became a song that poured from his heart. His song was a wish to find a friend.
This is Dr. Mia Rochelle Loudon, also known as Dr. Mia Rowe. Welcome to this episode of Apollo and Pluto's Wish Quest, a companion podcast for my children's flipover book, Apollo's Wish and Pluto's Dream Quest, published by the Vivens Media Group. In my book, grief and healing run quietly through the story. Apollo misses his grandmother, and Pluto carries the burden of being bullied. To explore how children navigate loss, change, and emotional healing, I spoke with Aryee, a licensed social worker and psychotherapist whose experience spans youth addiction counseling and serving as a school social worker and education liaison at the National Center for Children and Families. Ivan brings a deeply compassionate and pragmatic understanding of childhood trauma, loss, and resilience. We talked about how grief shows up in children's lives, how adults can support healing, and why stories filled with imagination and love, like Apollo's Wish and Pluto's Dream Quest, can help bridge pain and hope. Enjoy our conversation. This episode is about grief. The topics we touch on may be heavy. We hope it will be helpful, especially when talking to children about grief. You may wish to revisit a previous episode or skip toward the end of this episode where we talk about music and friendship if you feel like this episode might be triggering for you today, but we hope that you will revisit it again in the future. Welcome, Ivan. I'm honored to have you today. You bring a rich and grounded perspective to mental health through your work as a psychotherapist. Your background spans many roles, including as a school social worker and an education liaison for the National Center for Children and Families. I imagine your experience has given you a deep understanding of how young people navigate trauma, loss, and healing in school, home, and community settings. In Apollo's Wish and Pluto's Dream Quest, grief is a subtle but persistent presence. Apollo misses his grandmother, and Pluto carries loneliness, fear, and the weight of being judged. These are not small emotions, especially for children whose feelings often go unseen. I'm looking forward to exploring with you how grief shows up in childhood, how we can offer safe paths through it, and how imagination, play, and connection can become lifelines. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Mia Rochelle. It's a pleasure and an honor to have the opportunity to speak with you today about grief and loss and to explore it through your awesome book.
Yes, absolutely. You've worked with children and families in many different roles as a psychotherapist, youth addiction counselor, and school social worker. What first drew you to supporting young people through difficult times?
When I think back to what drew me to working with children, I think about my own childhood experience. I think back during my elementary school days, being part of the aftercare, after school program, and working with youth adults there, right? They weren't our teachers or our parents or our friends, but they were adults that we can confide in, right? They invested in, our growth. They listened to us. They modeled social skills for us. They mediated when we needed mediation, and they helped us process issues outside of school. They really taught us a sense of resilience. So when I think about my own, professional journey, I think it's rooted in those childhood experiences with adults that I felt safe being with.
Thank you for that. In your experience, how do children understand grief differently from adults?
Well, grief is experienced similarly between children and adults. There could be a shared shock if there's a death. There's obviously some shared sadness. There's shared anger. So children and adults share a similar path when it comes to grief. I think specifically to the 5 stages of grief, right? So the 5 stages of grief revolve around denial, and this is in no specific order, but it's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And a child, at the same time, an adult can fall anywhere on that continuum. I think of a roller coaster when it comes to that process, right? So, specifically when it comes to children processing grief, the difference that I've noticed is maybe the developmental stage. Maybe there's some regression around post tragedy or post death or any change or adjustment may be going through. So, just the developmental stage they may be going through, the ability to turn off them processing grief versus adults. Adults may, for lack of a better term, turn off that grief process maybe because they have to go to work or they have to function
Right.
for their children, whatever they may be going through. Where children may process it more impulsively, I would say. For example, my mother-in-law passed away, and my daughter, she's still going through the grief process. So, matter of fact, this morning she bursted out into tears in the middle of the night. So I went and see what was happening, and she said, "Hey, I miss Nana." Um,
Oh.
so it was that sense of, that depression, right? Maybe she was going through those depression symptoms, right? Not being able to sleep. Um, along with that, it may be a change of appetite, right? Irritability. So those different symptoms that pop up along the continuum of grief and loss.
Yes, I lost my mother in 2020. And at her memorial service, my son, who was maybe only 4 years old at the time, he stood up and told a story that just reminded me so much of my mother and the journey that she had gone through with battling diabetes. It just really stunned me. And so, comparing that loss of my mother versus my father, just having my son be part of it added an additional dimension of having another person to worry about in
Right.
terms of him having grief while I was also having my own.
Your own.
And I think adults may think of grief only in terms of death, but children grieve losses of all kinds, like moving to a new school, losing a friendship, or even changes at home. How do you help children name and process different kinds of grief?
Ways that I've been able to do that is focusing on not just allowing kids to verbalize, um, thinking outside of the box in terms of like their communication, maybe some nonverbal communication, maybe modeling. We talked about, I know I have this, but having a sense of wanting to protect my children from experiencing grief, right? So allowing them to see your grief and allowing them to understand how you're processing the grief. Maybe you're in a down mood and they have an opportunity to understand, hey, maybe mom or dad or my caregiver is also experiencing what I'm experiencing too. When it comes to that, it's more of a guidance as apart from protecting kids from experiencing what they may be experiencing. Maybe they're experiencing that anger or sadness or a longing, right? So when able to see us grieve in that same way, they're like, hey, I'm not alone. It can be normalized in that way.
That is so important. I was recently listening to some parenting tips, and a question came up of what emotions were we who are now parents, but when we were children, allowed to express versus what emotions the adults were allowed to express. And as you can imagine, if you look back enough years, not so many for the children that they were necessarily allowed to express, and maybe the parents had the full range, maybe not.
Right.
So that's one thing that I think about in my parenting is just being present for my son. So whether it's a positive emotion or one of the, maybe we shouldn't categorize them, just correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the negative ones, then just being present so that he has a space to feel them
Right.
and they can come and they can go and I'll just be there with him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It makes me think about, I just keep coming back to resilience, teaching resilience. And part of resilience is processing those difficult feelings, right? Um, understanding like I may experience sadness, but it's not going to last forever. I'm going to experience um, positive emotions as well.
Yes, absolutely. From your perspective, what role does imagination play in helping children cope with grief?
I want to say this is my favorite part about how children are able to process whatever experience they may be going through. But what comes to mind first is symbolism, right? Through
Mhm.
play, kids are able to express. In the world of psychotherapy, we allow kids to express through expressive modalities. And, we think about art and storytelling and role playing and music and dancing and movement. That those modalities help children really gain a sense of control of their emotions, right? I was talking back about shock that may be experienced through grief and loss or adjustment, and helping kids as apart from asking them and telling them to give you some feedback when they might not be ready to, they can have the expressive outlets to express how they're feeling. One thing that I like to do with some of my youth clients is play therapy. And through play therapy, sometimes we may do role playing or storytelling, right? So they may have an opportunity to assign me to somebody significant in their life and be able to talk about what they would say to that person, right? Or what they may experience with that person. I think about Apollo and Pluto's story, where there's a longing for grandmother. She shows up in his play, his imaginative play, as a champion for him, as an audience member, right? As a playmate. So I think of that. I think of kids having an opportunity to experience some escapism, right? Some imaginative way of understanding the world.
Absolutely. And Pluto is struggling with bullying and fears about school. So he uses music to soothe himself. And as you mentioned, music and other arts can be one of the ways to deal with difficult emotions. So, can you talk more about how creative outlets like music, art, or storytelling help children express grief they can't always put into words?
Right. So when I think about children expressing through play and music, I think about association. It offers an opportunity to associate stories, different songs, different art to their grief process, right? When I think about that, I think about how media lays an influence on us. If you think about the movie Inside Out, they associate emotions with colors, right? So
Right.
anger may be red, blue may be sad. And I think that association allows kids to grab from these experience and lend themselves to processing through demonstration, right? They may see a figure, oh, this reminds me of somebody that I've lost or my old friend that I don't see anymore. Um, Helps them to model and then imitate what they want to see.
Absolutely. When you were saying that, the I guess metaphor that came in my mind is a Crayola box of emotions.
Yes,
Just having the different names for emotions and different colors associated is helpful as well.
absolutely.
In my book, the boys find friendship and comfort in each other. And I know for me, my friendships are just so important for all the ups and the downs in my life. How important are friendships for children who are experiencing grief?
Friendships are extremely important because they offer a sense of empathy versus
Mm.
sympathy. So when I think about empathy, I think about somebody with you, experiencing with you. And that's more likely to happen in a friendship, in a friendship setting, as opposed to sympathy, where, though people may sympathize you and may have the right intentions, but they may be sorrowful for you from afar, right? Or they may
Right.
pity your situation. And that doesn't necessarily bring about, though they may be positive, there's positive intent, it may not bring about those kind of feelings that were intended, or bringing somebody's mood up. So I do think about empathy, being with someone, experiencing maybe their emotions with them, um, offering them some unconditional positive regard, right? Hey, you're going through this thing, but I'm going to be with you, right? Or helping them experience escapism through shared interests. Maybe you like the same song that I like, so we're dancing together. Or, we are experiencing art in the same space. Um, so when I think about friendship and comforting each other, I think about those things.
I think those are some great tips that adults can use as well. Sometimes it can be difficult or awkward if someone has experienced a loss, but I heard in your response some good ideas for how we can show up for our friends, whether, it's for children who are friends or adults who are friends. So thank you for that. It's really
Sure.
useful. And what can parents and caregivers do to create safe spaces for children to talk about grief, especially when children might want to protect adults from their feelings? In the book, Pluto's going through it and he doesn't really want his mother to know. And later, he does get to a point where he can talk to her about it, but before he is reserved from talking to his mother about what he's going through.
Mhm. When I think about experiencing grief, I think about experience parents should experience with kids, right? Just kind of going
Mhm.
back to that resilience piece. I think the resilience is like at the top of the list of how kids can be assisted by their adults in processing grief, and just kind of being open to when they want to express themselves. I think about maybe experiencing funerals, right?
Mhm.
Celebration of life, or creating traditions around the memory of someone, right? Allowing it to be externalized versus internalized, where kids can have their own like self dialogue about what has happened, as opposed to having it out in the open where we're all collectively experiencing it. Um, One thing that I do with my kids, all the losses that we've had, we celebrate during the holiday season. I create an ornament around, maybe there's a loss of the year or some adjustment that's been made, whether positive or negative, and then we're able to process. So it's just creating memories, creating milestones, new milestones, right? The grief or the loss may be a milestone that brings about a longing or some difficult emotions, but creating new traditions, milestones could offer some positive regard to what has happened and a new beginning.
That is really resonating with me. Lots of thoughts. Some of the work I do brings together art and science. So this book is one example of it. But there's this concept of embodied learning. And so when you're talking about the ornament as a symbol of a loss that has happened, it makes me think about being able to hold something, have it be tangible, have something you can touch to help process it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And for my family, well, Rochelle, I'm Mia Rochelle, of course, but there was a Rhonda Rochelle before me, and my niece is Marissa Rochelle. So my niece and I, this year for my mother's birthday, although we live apart, We got together at the same time and each had, a little cupcake for her with the
Right.
candle and celebrated her anyway. So I do think it's important to have these ways to continue to connect and process grief together.
Absolutely.
So thank you for sharing more ideas. There might be another Christmas ornament on my tree. That's
Right.
another thing that I really do like each year, having a new ornament.
That's cool. That's cool.
Great ideas.
Thank you.
And another important presence in a child's life is schools. It's where they spend so much of their waking hours, and you've worked in schools.
Yes.
What roles do teachers and school communities play in supporting grieving children?
I think teachers and the wider community serve as a family. I think it was evident in the tragedy that I was part of mediating, that the school community and the wider community came together, where teachers could take that teaching hat off and be an ear and be a counselor and be a shoulder and help children process that grief. And then when it's a shared experience, when it's some shared trauma, giving a safe space for students to express themselves. Hey, this is what I'm going through. Maybe I don't have the bandwidth to go through this test, or, do what my normal daily function would look like. Taking that hat off and leaning into what everybody is already experiencing in the school and in the wider community. So it's not just that tragedy brings that about, but just teachers in the wider community knowing that we're closer than just, sending my kid to school, having them do the work and bring a grade home. Because going back to that DABDA 5-step grief process, anybody may be anywhere on that roller coaster. And that has an impact it can have an impact, especially on children, on their daily functioning. A kid may be acting out where they don't normally act out, but that may be where they are in that process. They may be angry in that grief process, and they may need that support. So knowing that the school it's not a vacuum, it's not by itself, it also impacts the wider community and vice versa.
Following from that, the idea that potentially a parent could see school is just a place where the kids get good grades or not, and then, come on home, but it's far more personal than that. What are some of the common myths about children and grief that you wish more adults understood?
Um, that grief is not just for adults. The process of death, which is part of life, doesn't just belong to adults. My father-in-law, who passed away, said before he passed, he said, "Death is a part of life." And at the time, he said, it just happens to be our turn now." So it made me think about that. We're not the only family that goes through this. Every family will go through this, whether it's something shocking or, natural causes, or like we're talking about, it just doesn't pertain to death, but it could be just an adjustment, moving, changing schools, or having someone leave, right? Or a new person come in. That process is not just for adults to shield their kids, right? Let them experience. I know for me growing up, my parents emphasized like the line between what kids should know and what adults kind of protect from them. But I think when it comes to this particular subject matter, it serves them better later down the line once they get older.
Absolutely. And from some of the things I see in news stories and social media and beyond, kids are teaching up these days, teaching their parents, take a
Right.
breath, breathe.
Right.
And so I wonder, to the extent that they get some of these tools to process these more difficult emotions, they might teach their parents a thing or two in the process of how to deal with these difficult emotions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But some children might feel very alone in their grief, that they may not have a support system that they can rely on. So, can you speak to what strategies could help children who feel very lonely in their grief feel less isolated?
Sure. There's a I think about giving kids an opportunity to process with somebody outside of their home space,
Mhm.
or the people that are closest to them, right? So when I think about that, I think about processing with a therapist, processing with a counselor at school, from an informal standpoint, processing with a friend, and
Mhm.
promoting that. Have you talked to your buddy about what you're going through? Keeping that open dialogue to give opportunities for children to find a safe space to process, and then not being afraid to check in with them. We talked about isolation, and that could be a symptom of depression. The onset of it's a depression symptom. So bringing them out of that by recognizing that this is out of the norm, right? So if they're isolating, do you normally isolate? Are you not doing the things that you normally like to do? Just processing those types of questions with them, and hopefully getting to the bottom of the change.
That's very helpful. Thank you. If a child listening to this conversation has recently lost someone or is feeling grief of any kind, what words of comfort or encouragement would you want to share with them?
Of course, I would always start with "You're not alone," right? With all the children that I meet with that deal with grief, I always start with "You're not alone." Um, First of all, I'm as an adult, I'm here with you, and then your support system is there with you, right? And it could be somebody outside of your support system, not close to you, but still able to process with you. And giving adults, friends, caregivers, acquaintances an opportunity to process with you, right? To lift you out of those spaces. So, first of all, you're not alone. It's okay to cry. I love that one in particular. I think in our society, sometimes, it's promoted where crying is not okay, or crying in certain circumstances is not okay. But I think it's cathartic to be able to push those emotions out. And sometimes that happens through crying. And on the flip side, seeking out fun, right? Seeking out an opportunity to laugh. Yeah, like that old saying goes, laughter is the best medicine. So seeking those, being deliberate about those opportunities to laugh and to share and to be in a positive space.
Absolutely. And I think music as well. I see all those vinyls behind you.
Yes, yes, yes.
So, what music do you turn on when you want to lift your mood or find comfort?
Well, music is my favorite way to process. So
Mhm.
I'm just like art. I love like interpretive art, where I can
Mhm.
paint my own picture. And in that sense, with the music I love jazz. I love instrumental music because it allows me to paint my own picture, not necessarily influenced by musical lyrics. And that's just my own preference. But it allows me to use my imagination. It just kind of harkens back to my own childhood, where imagination was heavy, coming up with my own stories, or being in creating my own atmosphere. So like jazz could, for me, it allows me to create that atmosphere that I want to be in. I can imagine being in a nice rainstorm or a nice sunny sky, just kind of based on what I'm listening to.
That's amazing. Music is part of what inspired the aspect of the book of how do these two boys from different worlds come together, and it's the music that brings them together.
Yes, I
And I
love.
hear you are a DJ.
I am.
So what songs do you play that really bring everyone together?
Oh man. Oh, um, I'll go back to this year. This year's song has been "September" by Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Classic. I think that's my mother's favorite band for sure,
Oh,
possibly her favorite song.
so
Yes.
that song is really great. It's definitely a bring together song. I love the songs that people kind of can sing, like Stevie Wonder's Sir Duke is another one. He says, music is like a separate world. It's a different world. And, kind of getting ready for this interview, I was thinking like, music is a world where you can escape reality
Mhm.
in a positive way,
Mhm.
and immerse yourself in something that can make you happy, and you can feel it all over. I'm choosing the lyrical songs because I also do want to mention that music can lend themselves to bringing about memories, bringing about nostalgia, like Apollo's loss of his grandmother, right? There may be a song that he plays that reminds of a time that they spent together, right? So I do think about that. Instrumental wise, I love Miles Davis. So anything from him. And yeah, solid.
Yeah, there's a Whitney Houston song. When I hear it, it takes me right back to the back seat of my youngest uncle's car because I remember the lyrics were like, "I believe the children are our future," and I was like, "Ooh, she's talking about me." Like
Uh,
most of the songs on the radio have nothing to do with children, and this one's about me, and I still love that song. I played it for my son.
yes.
I definitely play him Stevie Wonder, George Michael,
Yeah.
Prince, like the full Michael Jackson, of course.
Of course.
Um, all kinds of different music. Today's music, sure,
Yes.
music from even longer ago, blues and all
Yeah.
these different songs, I think are a necessary part of development is
ab-
to just hear the creativity that so many have had before us. And I think imagination and creativity are just so important throughout life.
Absolutely. They go hand in hand. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I do love when I hear DJ music in particular, how one song weaves into the next one. And I always try to imagine, like, how do they do that? Is it just a mastery? Like, your collection, and so what beats are going to vibe, and maybe it's the instruments or the lyrics or the theme.
Yes,
I've
it's
always wondered about that.
combination. That is a great description. It's definitely a feeling, a vibe. I always think about the heartbeat, right? I compare the rhythm to the heartbeat, and do songs sound similar in that heartbeat from that heartbeat standpoint? So it's like lifting the heartbeat in the DJ sense,
Mhm.
lifting the heartbeat of your audience, and that could promote movement, laughter, fun, and togetherness.
Yes, there's a reference to the drum on Pluto's side of the story when its heart is pounding
Yeah,
because he's afraid of going to school. And it's like, dun dun, is referencing a particular kind of drum.
love that.
Thank you. And in my book, Apollo experiences loneliness and Pluto has trouble with bullying, but the kindness they find in each other helped them both to heal. So, my final question for you is, what makes a good friend?
What makes a good friend? I
You can
think,
take your time, you don't have to rush to answer.
okay.
Think about it for a second.
Think about friendship, I think about universality. And what I mean by universality is a shared common experience. Knowing that I'm not alone in what I'm experiencing and how I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing. So it could be happiness, peacefulness, silliness, grief, anxiety, depression, anger. And I'll have somebody that I could bounce how I'm feeling and know that I'm not going crazy, for a lack of a better term, right? So I do love that about friendship, that shared universality. I think accountability is another big thing when it comes to friendship. And part of that is just checking in. You're not doing what you used to do. Is there something wrong? Or I see that you are, excelling in your goals and, offering that boost. Also, validating feelings, right? It's great that you're excited, knowing that you're not the tree falling in the forest and someone can actually see that you're doing well. or that you're suffering or going through something, right? And along with that is just the unconditional positive regard. No matter what you do, I'm going to be here for you. Nothing you can do is going to shake our friendship. And that kind of lends itself to breaking through like the self-reflection, when someone may feel, may need a self-esteem boost or uneasy or having some thoughts about something that they're unsure about, right? Just having somebody, a confidant to say, hey, no, you're doing the right things.
That's wonderful. I definitely try to show up in those ways, and I feel very blessed that my friends and family show up for me in those ways as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Me as well.
I have so enjoyed talking with you. Thank you for spending this time with me.
Me too. I'm so happy to have been chosen for this interview. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Rochelle.
Thank you too. Thank you for saying yes. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can order Apollo's Wish and Pluto's Dream Quest at vivensmedia.com or through your favorite retailer or by supporting your local bookstore and requesting it there. This is Dr. Mia Rowe signing off. For my little one and all the big dreamers with big imaginations, keep dreaming.